Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of September. Today we have some updates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss Kherson district. There were a few updates, and the first one is that the Ukrainians were trying to attack from the north. That was some kind of recon combat. The Ukrainians sent from direction of Mirolubivka in direction of Novovoskresensk and in this on the south, something around 3 tactical campaigns, but they were defeated and were forced to move from their previous positions. Some updates are coming from our bridgehead between Andreevka, Belogorovka, Shastliva in this area. Some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to develop this bridgehead and they got control over a small town on the Ingulets River, Malosedimenuha, this one. As you can see, no matter that the level of the river raised, and no matter that the Ukrainians in this area are cut from the mainland, they are still there, and the Russians still haven't cleared this area and haven't took control and returned control over this area. And as I can see, this situation become critical for the Russians because the Ukrainians, step by step, meter by meter, they're developing this bridgehead. Of course, let's wait a little bit, but if the Ukrainians are able to continue developing their bridgehead in this area, we can say that the situation becomes more critical for the Russians. But if the Ukrainians are not able to develop, that means that it's some kind of artillery back, and the Russians gave such opportunity for the Ukrainians to cross the river just for one purpose: to destroy and reduce them by artillery and aircraft shelling. If we are talking about Kherson district, yesterday in the evening, the Ukrainians sent some recos and some commandos in this area, but they were spotted, and this night there was some kind of counter-terrorist operation from the Russian side, and they were trying to find and destroy the Ukrainian scouts in this town. They didn't give us any report about the number and so on, but anyway, something happened this night. If we're talking about the entire area, the Russians are saying that as a result of the previous 24 hours combats in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 180 soldiers, something around 19 armored vehicles, and around 3 artillery systems. So this is about Kherson district. If we're talking about the area between our Orekhov, Gulyai-Polye, and Velika Novoselovka frontline, the frontline is stable, and the Ukrainians are trying to find the weakest point in the Russian defense area, so that's why they're sending every day some commandos, and every day those commandos are defeated and destroyed. So the Russians are saying that during the previous hours the Ukrainians sent some tactical group from 65th Brigade, and they were spotted and destroyed, and they were attacking in this area between Gulyai-Polye and Vasilievka. The Russians are saying that 65th Brigade lost up to 100 soldiers and 10 armored vehicles. So they were trying to find the weakest Russian position, but as we understand, they couldn't do this. If we are talking about Donetsk district, the picture is the same. The Ukrainians are shelling this town heavily. And Donetsk, Makiivka, Gorlovka, these 3 towns is under very heavy Ukrainian shelling, and the Russians are saying that as a result of the previous Ukrainian shelling of this town, there are around 9 people killed during this civilians. 9 civilians were killed during this Ukrainian shelling. So the situation is critical. The Ukrainians are trying to attack the civilian facilities. There is no water in this town, so their winter is coming, so it's also a problem for the Russians, and for now they don't have any solution how to solve this issue and to be on the legal side of the question, if we can say it like that. Some updates are coming from our Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Bakhmut, Seversk area from this square. First of all, the Russians continue attacking, storming Bakhmut, Zaitsevo, the south of this area, Bakhmut, towards the New York agglomeration, this line, and they achieved some success in this area. Furthermore, there are very heavy clashes, small town Zaitsevo, and now the Russians focused on this area, and the Russians are saying that as a result of the previous attacks, the Aidar National Battalion that was located in this area lost more than 50% of their personnel, and they were forced to move from this area. So as you can see, after the Russians got control of Kadima, Mykolaievka, now they're concentrated on Zaitsevo and trying to take control over this town, and as soon as they're able to do this, they will be able to block and to establish fire control over Bakhmut from the south. If we're talking about this Bakhmut itself, the Russians are saying that they managed to kill some very high officer of 93rd Brigade in this area, mechanized brigade. Furthermore, we got more updates from Bilogorovka, this town. If you remember, the previous week we discussed about the status of this town. First, we got update from the Ukrainians that they got control over this town because they made some, as the Russians are saying, TikTok videos, like they were sending some groups. They entered this town, made a video, and then they left this town. Then the Russians reported their return control, but today we got the video from the Ukrainians that they're moving in this town easily without any problems. There was something around 2 armored vehicles in this area. So this town is in the gray zone, but I believe that the Russians are not there. They don't even control this town. They did some regrouping, and I suppose that for now this is the gray zone. Tell the truth, it's a very big question for me why the Russians have such problems on the front line, on the main front line in this area. So if Ukrainians want, I believe that they will be able to attack Lysychansk. We understand that there's some force in Lysychansk, but anyway, I'm not sure that it's a very good idea to have such problems on the front line when your enemy are able to cross, because we understand the differences between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians has a very big number of their forces, so it's not a very big problem for them. If they see if something is empty, they immediately fill this emptiness with their soldiers. So the Russians shouldn't provide them these possibilities, because if the Ukrainians enters, it is very difficult to get them out of any town, village, city, or even a small tree. If their tree is empty and the Ukrainians get control over a tree, it's very difficult to get him out of this tree. So it's like nonsense to have such problems on the front line. If we're talking about other situation in this area, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the attack area between Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and this Nikolaevka, they were targeting few objects, and the main object they targeted was the Slavyansk power plant. And as you can see, this one, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainian power plant were destroyed. So we can say that it's like not the first power plant, and the Russians are attacking the power plant one by one, with some period, with some distance in time. They're not doing like them at the same time. They try to stretch these actions in time, but anyway, I believe this is not the final power plant the Russians attacked. I believe they will continue doing this before winter and so on. If we are talking about Kramatorsk, the Russians are saying that during the previous hours they attacked Kraken brigade in this area, Kraken special forces, and today the Russians reported first time during this beginning of the special operation, they reported that they attacked the base of the PMC Academy. It's like the ex-Black Hawk Academy, PMC in this area. They didn't give us the numbers about the losses, but anyway, I believe that maybe soon they will provide us more information about the losses among the PMC Academy in this area. If we're talking about the entire area, the Russians are saying that as a result of the previous attack, the Ukrainian lost more than 110 soldiers and something around 20 armored vehicles. And as I understand this number doesn't include the number of losses among the Aidar battalion in Zaitsev, because 50%, that's a lot of entire battalion or something like this. And also this number doesn't include the number of losses among the academy and Kraken in this area. So this is the situation about Donbass area. Now let's talk about Kharkiv, about the Kharkiv front line. The Ukrainians still tries to cross Oskol River. They are still trying to storm Liman, Yampol, this area, because they understand that they're losing time every day, then the time works for the Russians, it plays in Russian favor, so that's why they need to be in a hurry to establish the bridgehead. But the Russians have a very powerful army there. I'm not saying that the Russians are successful, sometimes they are defeated. As you see, the Ukrainians control Ozerno, Dibrova, Stary Kralovan, Bruskovka, Shurova, all these towns along the river, and the Russians were forced to leave these forests along the Seversky Donets river. The most important town is Liman, Yampol. The Russians are sending everyday updates from this town Liman, saying that everything is under control. The situation is difficult, not so critical as we saw in Balaklia, Zoom bridgehead, but anyway, the Russians also understand that they can't allow the Ukrainians to establish bridgehead. They just can allow them to have some towns along the river because it's not so critical. It's even it's an even better position because anyway, if the Ukrainians have some towns along the river, that means that they need to send forces, and that means that the Russians will be able to shell and attack these towns with artillery, because every time, if the situation frontline is stable, that means that you don't need to fix, you don't need to coordinate your artilleries. They always know where to attack and where to shell. So that's why sometimes it's even very good, because it's like a lot of artillery backs along the front line, a lot of places where the Russians know where to attack. And if we are talking about Oskol River, this one, the Russians are saying that at some places Oskol River is very low level, so that's why it's not very difficult to cross this river. There are a lot of reports from the area, lot of opposite reports from the area between Dvoriechye and Kupiansk, between these two towns. If we take a look at the Western sources map, there is no changes on this map, and according to the Western sources map, Kupiansk, Dvoriechye is under Russian control, and there is no even gray zone, as we can see near, let's say, Liman. As you can see, there is town Studionak. This town used to be under Russian control. This blue cloud is showing that this area is under Ukrainian control. So I believe this Studionak is in the gray zone according to the history of this map. But if we're talking about this area, there is no changes. So that means that the Western source map are not saying and are not confirming the situation that these towns is under Ukrainians. But the Russians are saying that Ukrainians have some progress in this area. They have some progress in Dvoriechye near this area and near this town. So, and this is a very critical situation. This is the most dangerous situation, and the Russians need to do something. And by the way, they started because even exactly from this area, we start receiving reports from the Ukrainian side, from the Russian side, that the Russians started using the drones provided by Iran, or they start to use drones that were built on the basis of the Iranian drones. And the Ukrainian sources and the Western sources are saying that the Russians are very successful. These drones are very useful. The Ukrainians already have the first losses among the armored vehicles and tanks, and this is very important because, as you know, as we saw in the previous phases of this war, the Russians mainly were trying to attack the Ukrainian forces when there were a lot of forces. Like, say, you can say that if the Ukrainians managed to accumulate some force at some certain area, the Russians started shelling this area heavily, and that's why they achieved some success. But the Ukrainians found a solution again, this tactic. They start stretching their forces, trying to use the mobile groups, and because of that, it became very difficult for the Russians to support and to attack these small tactical groups, where you can find just one armored vehicle and let's say 10 soldiers. It's very difficult to spot these forces, and according to the Russian standards of commands, it's very difficult to attack these areas, because sometimes when local forces ask artillery support, it passes sometimes more than an hour, and of course that's a lot of time, enough of time for these mobile Ukrainian groups to leave this area, and sometimes the Russians attack empty fields. It's the problem, and everybody understands this. But now the Russians start using these drones, and these drones, their main goal of these drones is to attack single targets. And this is very important because now the Russians don't need to wait for artillery. Now they're using artillery just to stop the big Ukrainian offensives, like in Nikolaev, like in Liman area and so on. But using these small drones, they are able to spot these small mobile groups and to attack them. So this is very important. And a lot of professionals, a lot of military experts are saying that this might be a game changer this autumn. So we will see and we will discuss this situation, because I suppose that we're going to see more and more updates about those attacks, and soon the Russians are planning. I suppose that they will. I expect them to show us more videos about these successful attacks. If we're talking about the entire Kharkiv area, the Russians are saying that during the previous hours they attacked. Mainly they were focused on the 14th Mechanized Brigade, this one, and as a result of this brigade lost, or entire losses of Ukrainians in the Kharkiv districts, is about 150 soldiers and 17 armored vehicles. So this about the loss, about the progress on the front line. Today I got few important updates. First of all, from the Western source, from the Ukrainian sources, that some specialists are saying that in the mid-autumn, or we can say even in late autumn, we're going to see entire stop of the front lines. The Ukrainians, and this is not the decision of Ukrainians, the Western specialists are saying that that was an order from the United States, from the Western sponsors, that to stop any war, any, like we can say, frontline activities in the like late autumn. So somewhere in November, maybe in October, the Ukrainians will stop and they won't start doing anything. If it is the first update, and this is very important, we can understand, of course, the Ukrainians. We will discuss this topic a little bit in 5 minutes. And if we're talking about the Russians today, I got report about the deployment of the 3rd military corps, Russian military corps, and the Russians are saying that they moved their 3rd military corps in Zaporozhye area. So we can say that now the area between Kherson and Volnovakha, the south of Ukraine, has the biggest number of the Russian forces in this area. There are forces from LPR, DPR, and also the Russians deployed here, the 3rd military corps. Furthermore, today we got another important update that the Russians started creating of the 4th military corps, and I believe that these military corps, they are planning to complete with the prisoners, with volunteers, and so on. So, and the Russians started, if we compare these two corps, we understand that the Russians started creating of the 3rd military corps in May. So they needed up to 3 months to complete creation of this corps, and after that they deployed this corps in the south. So if the Russians started their creating of their corps in September, that means it's the 9 months of the year. So that means that somewhere in January the Russians will be able to deploy the 4th military corps. To tell the truth, I'm not sure about their destination where the Russians are planning, but if the Russians are planning to fill this corps with prisoners, with stormtroopers, I believe that this corps the Russians will deploy somewhere in this area, because there are a lot of because the Russians anyway need to return back the north of Kharkiv, like Balaklia, Izum, Bridgehead. They need to return this town, and furthermore they need, by that time I believe that the Russians will be able to get as close as possible to Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, and they need forces to storm this town. So I believe that this 4th military corps, the Russians are planning to deploy in this area and to complete the Donbass arc operation by storming these towns. I believe that in months or two, I believe in 2 months, somewhere at the end of November, the Russians will be able to get control over Bakhmut. Maybe they will be able to reach Chasov Yar. They will achieve some tactical I don't know, flexibility on the north by taking Bakhmut, and this will be the final battle in this year, if the Ukrainians are not planning to start the counteroffensive operation anywhere else. Now let's talk about another important topic. Today we discussed that the Russians attacked the Slaviansk power plant in this area, and a few days ago I found a very interesting picture. This is the map of Ukraine, and this central part is Moscow, this Belarus, this Ukraine. This is the, like you see that, this like electricity map of Ukraine, the light map of Ukraine. You see this Kiev in the middle, this Kiev, this Crimea, this Donetsk, let's say this Odessa, this is Kherson, Nikolaev, this is Kryvyi Rog, this is Zaporozhye, Dnieper, this is Kharkiv. So this is the picture of Ukraine a year ago, on the September 2021, and this is the Ukraine on the September 2022, 6 September, like a year after. As you can see, the situation with the electricity and the power plant in Ukraine is very critical, as you can see. And this picture was done, as far as I remember, by the day that the Russians attacked the Kharkiv power plant. And as you can see, there is no problems, we can say, in Kiev. Like there's almost no changes with Kiev, and with Lvov, it's the west part of Ukraine. But if we're talking about the east part, the problems are very huge. There is no problem with Odessa. The situation is almost the same as you can see Odessa, but if we're talking about the villages around Odessa, there are some problems. If we're talking about the Russians, their coast there is almost no problems. As you can see, there is light all along the coast of the Black Sea and Crimea, so the Russian controlled territory, there is no problem with electricity, Donetsk and so on. And if we are talking about Nikolaev, as you can see, there are a lot of problems in Nikolaev. This small, very small point of electricity light in this Kherson, as you can see, no problem. Almost the same picture, maybe a little bit less because there's Frontline not very far. If we are talking about Кривой Рог, Zaporozhye, Dnieper, these 3 points, this power plant Zaporozhye, this is Кривой Рог, Zaporozhye, Dnieper. And if you take a look at this map, these 3 towns, so the problem is very big. Of course, maybe the Ukrainians are doing this just to avoid and to help civilians and to have their anti-rocket systems to be on the safe side by turning off the electricity. But I believe that there is a problem in economy and the structural problems with Ukrainian energy infrastructure and energy facilities. This is Kharkiv, by the way, right in front of Belgrade, this Kharkiv. And if we take a look a year ago, this was a very big town with very nice light and infrastructure, and now we see just the black point on its place. So the problem is very big, and the Russians understand this. So they don't need to do a lot to create the total blackout in Ukraine, and they're doing this and they will do this anyway if the Ukrainians are planning to continue shelling Donetsk and Gorlovka, and if they're planning to kill civilians. I believe that the Russians, they know what to do, they know how to answer all these actions on their territory, on DPR and LPR. So this situation, the front line is stable, I repeat one more time. So let's see what the upcoming week is going to provide us. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel remind you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, and join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.